What if getting your child back was the worst thing that ever happened to your family? A child disappears into the desert. 8 years later, she comes back. Summer's here. The big films are dropping, and this one I had to get to opening weekend because Lee Cronin, coming off Evil Dead Rise, taking on a mummy movie that is absolutely not what the title makes you think it is, that was not a conversation I was willing to have late. Hi, I'm Rob, and this is A Constantly Racing Mind, where we break down sci-fi, horror, action-adventure, prop culture, and all things geek. Because here, every frame tells a story. A high-profile journalist named Charlie Cannon, played by Jack Raynor, and his wife, Larissa, played by Leah Costa, lose their young daughter, Katie, while Jack is stationed at an international news agency's Cairo bureau. She was abducted, and no one has a clue how to find her. 8 years pass. A new child is born. Then the authorities call. Katie has been found. She is alive. Now, what should be a miracle quickly becomes something else entirely. The mummy in this film is not a bandaged high priest chasing a reincarnated love. It's an ancient force that has attached itself to a child and is spreading, slowly, quietly, and horribly, through a modern household. At its core, Lee Cronin's The Mummy is a family story, and I mean that in the most unsettling way possible. The Cannon family loses a child in Egypt. That loss reshapes everything: who they are, how they live, how they function in the face of an absence that never heals. And then, years later, they get that child back. That's the setup, that's the miracle, and that is where the horror begins. What Lee Cronin is doing here is not a monster movie in the traditional sense. This is a film about how grief affects people's judgment, about how badly a family can want something to be true, and how that need becomes the door that lets something terrible walk straight through it. Lee Cronin is more than just the director of Evil Dead Rise. He is an Irish horror filmmaker who first broke through with The Hole in the Ground, his Sundance premiering feature debut. After building his name through short-form horror, especially Ghost Train, which won the Méliès d'Argent for Best European Fantastic Short Film. And when you look across that work, a pattern starts to show. Cronin keeps coming back to family trauma, domestic dread, and the fear of something familiar coming back wrong. That makes him a very strong fit for The Mummy, because this version sounds less like pulp adventure and more like the kind of intimate, grief-driven horror story he has already proven he knows how to make. David Garbett gives Cronin continuity behind the camera. He already shot Evil Dead Rise and worked in the Ash vs. Evil Dead world, so he brings horror experience, stylized genre control, and a track record of making confined spaces feel visually alive. Bryan Shaw brings serious credibility in horror editing to The Mummy. He cut both Evil Dead 2013 and Evil Dead Rises, so he already has a proven feel for gore, dread, and escalation in modern studio horror. Stephen McKeon may be one of the Cronin's most important repeat collaborators. He scored both The Hole in the Ground and Evil Dead Rise, and his work has already been noted for its role in building unease in Cronin's family-centered horror. And the makeup and prosthetics are one of the film's biggest strengths. Those makeup effects were created by Dutch artist R.N. Taytoon, whose prior work includes Wolfman, Pan's Labyrinth, Maleficent, Ghostbusters Afterlife, and many, many more. Cronin builds Katie's body horror around multiple phases of necrosis. The transformation could take 5 to 8 hours a day, and the final look was kept hidden from the rest of the cast, so their reaction would land with full force. Nick Bassett brings world-building credibility to The Mummy. After Ash vs. Evil Dead and Evil Dead Rise, he looks well suited to design spaces that feel grounded at first, then gradually poisoned by the horror inside them. So let's discuss Jason Blum and his company Blumhouse. And once you see Jason Blum, Blumhouse, James Wan, and Atomic Monster attached, the shape of this project becomes a lot clearer. Blumhouse built its name on horror, with clean hooks and personal stakes, while Atomic Monster helped define the modern franchise side of the genre through titles like The Conjuring, Annabelle, The Nun, and Megan. Their merger was completed in January of 2024, but both labels kept their creative identities, which makes The Mummy feel like a real blend of those strengths. And with Lee Cronin describing this film in terms of possession, infection, body horror, and family trauma, it does not look like anyone here is trying to revive The Mummy as a nostalgic adventure. One of the more interesting things about Lee Cronin's The Mummy is that it's not a universal release at all. The version was set up at New Line from the start, with Blumhouse and Atomic Monster producing and Warner Brothers handling distribution. So rather than reviving Universal's old franchise machinery, this film is coming in as a separate studio take built through New Line's modern horror pipeline. Jack Rayner as Charlie brings more than star power to The Mummy. His work in Ari Aster's Midsommar proved he can function with elevated horror, where emotional failure is part of the terror itself. That makes him a strong match for Cronin's grief-heavy, family-centered version of The Mummy, where the horror seems likely to come as much from rupture inside the home as from the monster at the center of it. He also played the Jet Propulsion Laboratory's founder, Jack Parsons, an occultist and follower of the infamous Aleister Crowley. Leia Costa plays Larissa, who, as Jack's wife and the kid's mom, brings emotional authority to The Mummy. Her breakthrough work in Victoria showed how powerfully she can carry fear, instability, and escalating pressure without losing realism. That makes her an especially strong fit for Lee Cronin's grief-heavy, psychologically driven take on The Mummy, where the horror depends as much on family rupture and emotional truth as on the monster itself. May Kalamawe brings proven genre credibility to The Mummy. Her work in Moon Knight showed that she can handle mythology, supernatural tension, and emotional stakes at the same time, while earlier horror work like Jinn gives her a direct connection to the genre. That makes her a strong match for Lee Cronin's darker, more psychologically driven take on The Mummy. Veronica Falcone brings authority and weight to The Mummy. Her work in Queen of the South, Ozark, and Perry Mason show how effective she is at projecting control, danger, and emotional history, which makes her a strong fit for Lee Cronin's darker, grief-driven version of this material. She is the kind of performer who can make the human tension in a horror film feel just as powerful as the supernatural threat. Now, if Linda Blair in The Exorcist became the face of possession horror, Natalie Grace's Katie may be doing something similar here. But through Cronin's lens of possession as infection, that means the terror is not just that something evil has entered the child. It is that the child's return may carry contamination into the home, into the body, and into the family itself. The movie has two tracks running in parallel. One is intimate and domestic, a family trying to rebuild inside a house that keeps feeling more wrong. The other is investigative, someone on the other side of the world piecing together the larger truth behind what happened to this child and why. Those two tracks are moving toward each other throughout the entire film, and when they meet, the picture that forms is not a comfortable one. This is body horror, this is possession horror, this is grief horror, and Lee Cronin wraps all three inside the imagery of ancient Egypt and uses it to ask one question that I think lands harder than anything else in the film. What does saving your family actually cost? While not a perfect film, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was shot very well. The framing and the slow reveal of the horror drove up the tension and anxiety. In my humble opinion, the sound design was excellent and extremely creepy, which also foreshadowed the horror to come. I thought the music did its job in setting the mood, good, but nothing spectacular about it. The special effects were good throughout the film, but depending on the budget, they may lack a little bit at times. However, when you are distracted by the action and the horror, it's not noticeable. It tells the story. I see that some have an issue with the 2-hour, 14-minute running time and the deviation back to the investigation portion of the story. You know who I'm talking about. However, I do see that the other fans wanted more family dynamics and less runtime. Or cut that scene or this. I don't have an issue with that. However, I think Lee Cronin did a great job presenting a full narrative that was not your typical action-adventure film with a mummy. I saw this film twice back to back, and I was not bored. I thought that May Kalamawi's Detective Zaki's investigation was important to the story because, as a human and a father, I would want to know why this happened to my daughter. Going in, I wondered, based on the trailer, why on earth would I invite this back into my home? However, as a parent, there are things we do that make no sense, especially when there is a palpable sense of guilt involved. If you've ever lost a kid, for whatever reason, then you know how you treat any other offspring instead of breaking up and turning against other family members. I think of Ordinary People, Hereditary, or any other grief-forward horror. This family stayed together and did the best they could. The film's opening, which sets up the family dynamic, reminds us that the entity they brought into their home was their cute, darling child. As a parent, you have a faith. Besides, we don't know if there is a possibility of continuing with this family or these circumstances in the future sequels. I felt that every actor did an excellent job of establishing emotional ties among themselves and with us, the audience. I'm talking about the young children, Sebastian and Katie's younger selves, and their older versions too. Billy Roy as Maudie was the perfect younger sister on the road to hell. May Kalamawe and Hawat Kamil gave us that good versus bad dichotomy that this story needed. Katie herself is not the antagonist, and those two made that clear. Anytime we get it into our heads that a story should be a certain way, or we tend to compare it to a certain style, that is because those styles probably worked. As far as this being an Evil Dead film, it is. But then again, what is an Evil Dead film? Is it extreme gore with camp humor? Or is it gory, humorless like the 2013 remake by Fede Alvarez, but produced by Sam Raimi? Lee Cronin just did Evil Dead Rise, and so did all of his main crew. He was hired for that reason. Have we seen this before? We've been seeing this since the original Exorcist. Find an ancient deity, turn it into a demon, have it possess someone, consult an academic, and figure out a way of getting rid of the said demon. You come to these films for the gore, if you love gore. You come in for the adrenaline rush, and you will tend to forgive all the bad judgment the characters make during the film. We have parodies like Scary Movie or Zombieland to reflect on those tropes. I enjoyed the story, the family dynamic, the investigation, and the mythology. So it took 2.25 hours, but I thought it was worth it. I had no problem with Project Hail Mary's runtime either, but a friend of mine mentioned she thought it was way too long. Go figure. My recommendation is go see this film if you love horror, if you love the slimy, over-the-top, cringy, crackly, oozing horror. I am a solid 5 out of 5. So those are my final non-spoiler thoughts on Lee Cronin's The Mummy. If you've seen it, let me know what worked for you, what did not, and whether this version really earns its place beside the other big screen mummy films. And if you've not seen it yet, drop your expectations down below. If you enjoy deep dives into horror, sci-fi, action-adventure, prop culture, and all things geek, subscribe to A Constantly Racing Mind, because here, every frame tells a story. And if you want to support the channel, check out the merch shelf and grab Run P before you head to the theater so you don't have to risk making your own cursed walk into the dark and missing the moment the tomb finally opens.